This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
I am John Huff, and I am the host of the John Huff Podcast.
Hey, I'm Mike. Welcome to Podcast Diaries. These are the stories of podcasters who feel alone, just like you. Well, there you go, John. How you doing today? You doing okay?
I'm doing good. You're in Texas, aren't you?
We are. We're in Texas. Yeah, Waco, halfway between Austin and Dallas. Where are you at?
I'm in London, Canada, not the real London.
London, Canada.
Yeah, but I've spent a bit of time in Texas as a working musician, and so I'm a little envious because Texas is way better than London, Canada in December, January, February, you know?
Yeah, I would imagine you're covered, huh?
Yeah. It's cold. It's really cold.
Really cold. So give us some of your background, John. What you say you're a musician. Tell us about you.
Yeah, I am a working musician and a drummer. And that's actually one of the reasons that I launched my podcast in 2019 was the reality of being a hired musician, which is what I am primarily, is that it's very transient and it depends very much on other people. I don't work unless other people work, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it becomes very frustrating to be rolling along as a touring player, which I've been, and then see that disappear on you and then be waiting for somebody else to pick you up. And so I needed something that was mine, that did not depend on the schedule and whim of any other people.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that has appealed to me for a long, long time is podcasting. And so it took years, but eventually I reached a point of starting my own show, primarily to have something that I could control.
Mm-hmm.
And music started me down that path. And it's been really, really important and helpful for me to have a thing that's mine, you know?
So would you say like studio musician? Is that basically what, like you just do the gigs when they're there?
I've done studio work. I've done road work.
Yeah.
I've been a band guy.
Yeah.
And that's an entity. And then being a hired player, which is what I eventually morphed into, really does depend on the whim of artists.
Yeah.
And those gigs are temporary, generally speaking, and it can be a difficult life. And you begin to lose faith in yourself just a little bit because the gigs aren't there, or you're on these great highs, and then suddenly it's just over, you know? And what do you do with that time? There's something called a tour come down, which is a very real thing mentally, where you're experiencing this really accelerated life, and then it's over. And then you're sitting back in your space again saying, what happened? Yesterday I was a touring musician, and today I'm not. What do we do with this energy that we have, and how do we fill the space between, the next tour or the next gig, whatever? A podcast was a great way for me to do that, to own something.
Yeah.
Handle that energy,
So tell me how you're doing that. What is the show about, and how does it service that for you?
Show started off, it's been a real roller coaster ride. I think a lot of podcasters have this experience where they go into it not 100% sure what they're about to do and what they even want to do, and then it turns into a thing. I started my show as an interview show because I've always been an interviewer. I had a music blog for a long time, and interviews were what I did. And so when I launched the show, it just seemed natural to me that I would do interviews.
Right.
And what I wanted to do with those interviews was provide the proof to people that it's possible to live an unconventional life. And because I needed the proof myself as a musician with downtime, I needed to know that other musicians were making this work. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so my first episode was with a guy called Phoenix Fire, who has many Guinness World Records for doing heinous stuff. And he's a fire breather and a freak show performer. And it's like, if this guy's doing it, what's impossible? If a guy who jumps into broken glass can make a living doing that. You know what I mean? Or he had records for letting people staple stuff to him. You know, the
So
500 staples in it,
just think somebody had to start that record,
right?
so at one point it was just one guy, one piece of paper, one staple, it's like, yeah, I
Right.
got the record.
And now it's like it's over 1,000 staples, I
Yeah.
think is the record
Wow.
now.
Wow.
So I brought in people like that, and I brought in lots of musician friends, who I knew.
Yeah.
It was pretty fertile ground in my own acquaintances to get the show rolling. And so whatever I did maybe 30 episodes of just talking to people who are doing unconventional stuff as the proof for my audience and as the proof for me that it was possible to do that.
Sure.
Coming off of tour can be depressing
Mm-hmm.
when that high goes away and you're stuck, worried about money, worried about what happens now. It's like I needed proof.
Mm.
And so that went for probably 30 episodes or so, starting in 2019. And my reluctance, I for many years was going to podcast and didn't. And my reluctance came from having done this kind of project before, where you start with great energy and you start really enthusiastic and into it. And then you set up your website and you get your logo and you get like the beginning part is full of energy and it's very, very engaging. And then the work part comes.
Mm-hmm.
After that initial high goes away, it's like, oh, shoot, I started this thing. Now what?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you do the work. And then after 8 or 9 months, it's not doing what you hoped it would. This is my
Right.
experience with blogs. I knew what I was getting into, and I was reluctant to walk down that path.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't want to start this podcast and then 9 months or a year later be burned out on it and watch it fade. And so I didn't start for a long time because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did start it eventually because I guess the pain of not doing it outweighed the pain of doing it. And guess what happened, Mike?
What happened?
9 months to a year later, I burned out on it. Exactly like I knew I would, you know?
Yeah.
And so it came to about 9 months later, I'd been interviewing, and those who do interview podcasts know the legwork that goes into that.
Mm.
Finding people, getting the interviews scheduled, doing the background research, doing the prep, editing the episodes. And it's a real grind. It can be a real grind. And I had some supreme highs. I mean, I interviewed a few people who were bucket listers for me.
Mm.
Some of it was really, really terrific, but I came to 9 months later and it was like, it's just not doing what I wanted it to do.
Yeah.
Became frustrated. I think that's going to be the curve for almost anybody who starts a podcast. There's a select few who maybe are celebrities already and have a following, and that track is a lot different. It's a lot greasier than those of us who start as nobodies.
Sure.
And I was having trouble scheduling guests in like December of 2019. And then I had a realization, and the realization was, much as I do interviews, I don't listen to interviews.
Mm.
The podcasts that I listen to are solo podcasts, one voice, one narrative.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I enjoy. And I had not really put any thought into it when I started my show.
Yeah.
I just did interviews because that's what I do. But then I realized I don't like interviews are not my thing necessarily, as a listener at least.
Sure.
And my introductions to the episodes had begun to become longer. My initial episodes were like a 3-sentence introduction and get to the interview, which I think is a smart way to do it.
Sure.
I began to become a little looser with my intros, began to talk more, and then it was like, oh, I see what's happening here. I want to talk.
Yeah.
So I dropped a solo episode in the first part of 2020. It was January.
Yeah.
I didn't have a guest.
Sure.
Dropped a solo episode. Got some good response to that.
What was that episode about?
That episode was about here's my story.
Okay.
So the podcast had been created, again, to provide proof that it's possible to live an unconventional life and make that work.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first solo episode was here's my experience with this. Here's the trajectory of me, this sort of epiphany moment I had. I had been a struggling writer, and then I had kind of an epiphany moment. Martinis might have been involved, whereby I began to step back into music in a way that I hadn't in a long time. And so I transitioned away from writing because I was struggling into music. And then these weird synchronicities began to happen and things blew up in a way. And so I just talked about that trajectory in my first solo episode, how I had gone from struggling writer to launching a podcast and this weird set of circumstances over the course of years that had led to that. So I was very honest about self-doubt and my own lack of confidence and some of the struggly stuff I'd had ego-wise, because I think there are probably useful things that people could pick out of that. So I just spent an hour talking about my own story.
Right.
And I really enjoyed it. And I can't listen to it now because I've gotten a lot better since then.
Sure. Yeah.
That's another thing for any podcaster. It's like, oh, I can't listen to my first episodes because, but if you wait to be perfect, I'm not perfect yet.
Yeah, you'll never do it. You'll never do it.
You won't.
Yeah.
You won't. And so I can't listen to them, but it was part of the evolution. And so I started to do more solo episodes because people liked them. And I liked doing it, and it felt natural to me. And I continued to drop interview episodes in, etc. But over time, the show has morphed into almost entirely a solo thing. And I would like to tell you that flipping that switch blew the podcast up to my wildest dreams. Truth is, it didn't.
Sure. Yeah.
I lost audience.
Yeah.
I lost people who wanted to hear interviews, but then I picked up new people who were interested in the content I was producing. And it continues to be an evolution.
Well, the thing about that is you lost some audience, but you gained the audience you needed.
I think so.
As a creator, if you're not putting out something that you're willing to listen to or something that you enjoy doing, then why are you doing it?
Right.
There's just no reason. I see that you're up to episode 123. Looks like the last one that was released.
That's right.
And so you guys have been I guess you're talking to yourself. So, you've been busy. Is this weekly?
In a perfect world, yes, it is.
Yeah, I get that. Sure.
But
one of the things you said or kind of alluded to was consistency. And here at the network, that is the first thing we try to instill in any new show or any podcaster that comes to this door. If you want to start and do bi-weekly, great, let's do that. If you want to start and go weekly, great, let's do that. If you want to start and go monthly, good luck. But don't start weekly and then go back to bi-weekly. Right. You're going to lose every time. And come in here and practice a little bit. This is not just turn on a mic and start talking. It does take a little bit of skill, and that skill comes from practice. Like you say, the more you do it, the better you get at it. The more you discover about how good you are at certain things also.
Plus, this is where your particular style comes from. So if you listen to episode 30 of my show, whatever the first solo one was, to episode 123, it's like a different person is talking. This idiom sort of evolved. And some people might say it was better in the beginning, and some people might say it was better now. But there's a comfort level that comes that can only come from practicing it. It can only come from doing 100 episodes, right?
Yeah.
If you're a professional comedian who launched a podcast, you've already spent 10 years in the clubs.
That's right.
Developing that tone. It seems like you came right out of the gate on episode 1 fully formed. Well, yeah, you did in a sense because you spent all that time developing this personality. But most of us who did not do that have to develop it. It has to evolve as they go. That's been my experience, and it continues to evolve. It's funny because my wife will hear me editing an episode.
Yeah.
She'd be like, "Who is that?"
Yeah, every time I play something for my wife, she thinks it's me, and it's always somebody else. So I don't know what that means. So let me ask you this. I have these questions that I ask everybody in this, and part of it is motivation, success, things like that. So But I think you've already addressed a lot of that. I think I kind of know your motivation. I think I know what you see as success, which is kind of where you're at now, because you're happy with it. Is that fair to say?
I've had to learn to a certain extent to not base my impression of success on the metrics, right?
Yep.
Because it's so easy to do.
Yep.
And you look at the statistics and you have this kind of arbitrary number in mind about what's success and what isn't. But then can you even trust the metrics? The numbers are very fudgy in podcasting, right?
Yep.
And so I mean, I've really struggled at times with I'm not getting enough traction. I'm not getting enough ears. I'm not getting enough downloads. And I've learned the hard way that if you go that route as your definition of success, you're probably going to struggle because you'll listen to podcast X and be like, we topped 10 million downloads. Thanks, everybody. How on earth do you do that? So I've had to redefine success, and I'm not even sure I have a great definition of it yet. All I really know is that I continue to want to do this. I would love it if it became a thing whereby I made a full-time living on it.
Sure.
And I think it's okay to have that aspiration, but that only comes, I think, through the course of just getting better and better over time. And so I continue to hone what on earth I'm even doing. I've tried to do more focused episodes. I've tried to do a lot of my podcast has been primarily concerned with music, but I've done histories of music, and I've tried to do really focused episodes as a way of defining what my niche is.
Right.
That's what you're supposed to do. And I found that to be a real struggle. My most natural episodes tend to be looser than that.
Yeah.
But they tell you can't do that. That's podcasting 2008, and we've evolved from that. Maybe we have, but my inclination is to do these looser episodes, and I get response from some people. Other people say your interviews are the best episodes. Okay. Or your histories are, or this is, or that is. And then other people like the loose episodes. It's like, if you get wrapped up in what everybody else wants, there's a fine line between doing what feels natural to you and doing what your audience wants to hear. And in some way you have to straddle that line in a way that works for you. And so what is success? I think success is still feeling as though this is worth doing. I think you can just have a base level of, I guess I'm successful in the sense that I'm enjoying this because I keep doing it and I keep wanting to do it. And if I don't get 1 million downloads an episode, neither does, most of people don't. So
sure. They say that if you get somewhere between 200 and 500 downloads an episode, that you're in like the top 50 on the planet. I mean, that's on the planet. So
crazy, right?
You have to do what you enjoy. And I think that comes through to an audience as genuine, and you're going to find your people. I mean, this is going all the way back to cave times, You put your voice out there around the fire, and the people will come. They'll be your people. There's going to be some people that want to go to the other fire, and that's great. Whatever, go over there. These people are coming to my fire. We're talking. They're listening to my stories. We're happy here, So you got to be happy with that first, I think, before you try to even make this thing, explode or whatever. When you really put in the work, you got to be happy with the show to begin with.
And sometimes it takes 120 episodes before you even figure out what it is you're saying, right?
That's right. Yeah, it really does. It really does.
Even if you're an interviewer and your show is 100% interviewers, the common denominator is you. You know what I mean? Because there's this school of thought that says, well, I just need bigger and bigger guests all the time, and that'll pull their audience into my show. And the reality is it might for one episode. And then people will go away because they're not interested in your next guest.
Yeah.
And so the common denominator is still you. So
if you're not entertaining, if you're not enjoying it, then people will know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I could have Elon Musk on here tomorrow, and that would be great. But
for one episode.
But just for one episode. That's right. That's right. Okay, so last question, and I'll let you go. Can you give us an idea of the equipment and maybe the setup you use?
Absolutely. I'm very much no frills here. So I'm talking to you through a Shure SM58 microphone.
Okay.
Standard vocal mic is what
Yep.
you would expect
Yep.
from a working musician. I'm going through a Focusrite interface,
Mm-hmm.
which I did not always use.
Yeah.
That's a relatively new purchase for me. That's the Focusrite 212 2i2,
Okay.
the 2-channel one.
Yeah.
And when I record direct into Audacity, so free software.
There you
And
go.
then I learned how to edit it reasonably well. Thank you, YouTube.
Mhm.
And it's a pretty simple setup, the microphone was like $120 Canadian, something like that.
Yeah.
The interface was, I don't forget, a couple $100 maybe, but you don't even need that. I mean, that's more than is
Right.
necessary for
Right.
a one voice podcast.
Right.
And that's it.
Those
And
little
then
those little Shure mics, man, you can throw those things around. You can stomp on them. You can do all kinds of stuff to them, and they will survive.
this is why the 58 is the working musician's microphone.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Yeah. We had about a dozen of them. The last location we had a small event space. And so we would throw shows. We did comedy shows and music shows, and did an adult puppet show.
Wow.
A 1980s themed prom. I mean, we did all these weird things there. But we had a bunch of those mics, and man, I can't tell you how much they got abused. But I have yet to have one of them go out on me. So
They're tanks,
Yeah.
for sure.
they really are. All right, well, John, it was lovely to meet you.
And you.
I will listen and enjoy now that I know you even more. John, can you give us your name, the name of your podcast, and where people can find you?
Sure. I am John Huff, and I cleverly titled my podcast The John Huff Podcast. And you can find me on all of the platforms. In terms of downloading the show, listening to the show, I'm in all the places. And I'm on Instagram, John Huff Podcast, Facebook, The John Huff Podcast. I have a TikTok presence, also John Huff Podcast. And, my tagline is good things happen when you put yourself out there. So I put that out to you right now. The good things happen when you put yourself out there. So do that, do the thing, whatever it is, just take a shot.
It's great advice. It's great advice. John, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. It was
Thank you.
great to meet you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks
right.
so much.
We'll see you soon.
Cheers.
Check out more Podcast Diaries and plenty of other shows at roguemedianetwork.com. If you have a story to tell, reach out to us. info@roguemedianetwork.com. This has been a Rogue Media Network production.